I went there to disappear. That was my first mistake. I told myself it was for the noise, the kind of deep, thrumming bass that vibrated in your bones and crowded out thought. I told myself it was for the darkness, a plush, bruised gold and velvet black that swallowed faces and histories, rendering everyone an anonymous silhouette. Both of those were true. But the truer thing, the thing I wouldn't admit for 112 nights, was that I went there for the silence. His silence. It was a strange place to seek it, in the heart of Sombra, a club that bled noise onto the rain-slicked streets of a city that never slept. But his silence was different. It had weight. It had texture. It was a living thing, a pocket of stillness in the chaos, and it belonged entirely to him. Kwon Jae-un. I didn't know his name then. To me, he was just the man who owned the room, the man who moved through the crushing press of bodies without ever touching anyone. A ship parting water that sealed itself seamlessly behind him. For the first 3 weeks, I was just another shadow. I chose a booth in the far back, a small alcove raised by a single step, giving me a vantage point but keeping me out of the main currents of traffic. It was upholstered in dark red velvet that had absorbed decades of secrets and smoke. I would order a single glass of whiskey neat and make it last for 3 hours. I brought a book, always, a worn paperback I could hold as a shield. I never read a single word. My eyes were always on him. He would stand near the bar, or on the mezzanine that overlooked the dance floor, and he would simply watch. He wasn't a predator, not in the way other men were. He didn't scan the crowd for a target. He observed it like a cartographer studying a map of his own territory, noting every shift in the topography, every new fault line. The rooms reorganized around his presence. A laugh would die down as he passed. A path would clear without anyone seeming to move. He never raised his voice. I never saw him do more than incline his head, a barely perceptible gesture to the mountain of a man who was always near him, a man I would later come to know as Mr. Choi. And that would be enough. Whatever needed doing was done. My life outside those 3 hours a night was meticulously small. I worked at the city archive, digitizing brittle land grants and forgotten correspondence. I was good at it. My hands were steady. I understood the delicate art of handling things that could turn to dust with a single careless breath. My apartment was one room, clean and spare, with a single orchid on the windowsill that I watered every Tuesday. I spoke to my landlord once a month, the cashier at the grocery store twice a week, and my friend Sarah, a voice from my old life, every other Sunday. I was constructing a life of such profound quiet, such deliberate invisibility, that I thought it might retroactively erase the noise that had come before. The noise of a man who wouldn't let go, a man whose voice had become a sickness in my ears. Julian. My presence at Sombra was a contradiction I chose not to examine. An inoculation. I was surrounding myself with a loud, anonymous danger to build an immunity to a specific personal one. I told myself this was a logical strategy. I knew, even as I thought it, that I was lying. The first time he looked at me, properly looked, was on my 24th night. A fight broke out on the floor below my booth. It was sudden and ugly. A flare of masculine ego that caught fire in the alcohol-soaked air. Bottles smashed. People screamed. But the music never stopped. The bass just kept pounding like the city's indifferent heart. Mr. Choi and another man moved with a terrifying, fluid economy. There was no brawling, no shouting. Just precise, irresistible force. The disruption was contained and ejected in less than 45 seconds. I counted. Through it all, I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just watched, my hand resting on my untouched glass. When it was over, when the last of the broken glass was being swept into a dustpan by a silent busboy, I lifted my eyes and found his. He was standing on the mezzanine, looking directly at me. Not at the space I occupied, but at me. There were 100 other people looking his way, drawn to the epicenter of power, but his gaze was a straight, clean line to my forgotten corner. It held for 3 seconds, maybe 4. There was no expression on his face, no judgment, no curiosity I could name. It was just a look of pure, unadulterated acknowledgement. He saw me seeing him, and in that moment, My carefully constructed invisibility turned to dust in my hands. The next night, when I arrived, the small brass plaque on the table in my booth, the one that usually read reserved, was gone. In its place, waiting for me, was a single glass of the whiskey I always ordered, a bead of condensation tracing a path down its side. It was a statement. This place is yours. I know who you are. I watched you for 112 nights, and I never knew, not really, if it was a promise or a threat. The weeks that followed were a study in quiet escalation. The whiskey was always there, waiting. I never saw who brought it. I would arrive at precisely 10 p.m., and it would be sitting on the polished dark wood of the table, a silent welcome. I started thinking of it as a conversation. The club was the paper, the whiskey was the ink, and the words were all the things we weren't saying. I told myself it was just good service, a perk for a regular customer. A ridiculous thought. Sombra was not the kind of place that courted loyalty with free drinks. It was a destination, a dark star with its own gravitational pull. It didn't need regulars. It simply was. And I was just a woman in a corner booth. I continued to bring my book, a prop that felt increasingly absurd. My vigil became more focused. I learned to read the subtle shifts in his posture, the way his hands rested at his sides unless he was truly displeased. Then one would move to the small of his back. I learned that the barely there quirk at the corner of his mouth, the thing that arrived and left so quickly you could believe you'd imagined it, was his version of a smile. I saw it once, when a young woman with bright, nervous eyes, a singer on the small stage, finished her set and looked toward him, just for a second. He gave her that almost smile, and it was like the sun coming out for a fraction of a second on a day of dense, gray cloud. One night, a Tuesday, the city was draped in a cold, persistent rain. I left the club later than usual, the streets mostly empty, the neon lights bleeding across the wet asphalt. I walked the 6 blocks to my apartment building, my collar turned up against the chill. I was halfway down my street when I noticed it. The sound of a car engine, idling too low to be normal traffic. A long, black sedan, the kind of car that absorbs light, paced me, staying exactly half a block behind. My heart began to beat a frantic, trapped rhythm against my ribs. It was him. It was Julian. He'd found me. The old fear, the one I had been trying to suffocate with noise and darkness, rose up, cold and metallic in my throat. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely fit the key in the lock. I didn't look back. Couldn't. I threw myself inside, slamming the door, shooting the deadbolt, leaning against the wood as if I could hold the entire world at bay. I stayed there for a full 5 minutes, counting my breaths, waiting for the knock, for the voice. It never came. When I finally dared to look through the peephole, the street was empty. The black car was gone. The rain was washing the city clean. I told myself I had imagined it. That was easier. The alternative was too complicated, too frightening in a way I didn't have a name for yet. But the next night, as I was leaving the club, Mr. Choi was standing by the exit. He didn't look at me, just stared straight ahead at the opposite wall. As I passed, he spoke, his voice a low rumble. "Last night, you should take a taxi. It's safer." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command, delivered with the quiet authority of a man who dealt in facts, not opinions. I froze. It hadn't been Julian's car. It had been theirs. They had followed me home. The thought should have terrified me. A new kind of fear, sharp and immediate. Instead, a strange, unwelcome warmth spread through my chest. It was the opposite of being hunted. It was being watched over. The two feelings were so dangerously close, a razor's edge between them, and I didn't know which side I was on. "I'm fine," I said, the 2 words I had perfected over the last year, a shield for every occasion. Mr. Choi finally turned his head, his dark eyes unreadable. He gave a single, slow nod. And the next night, when I left, a taxi was waiting at the curb, the driver's door open. The fare, the driver informed me, had been taken care of. I was being managed. I was being handled. And the most terrifying part was the small, treacherous corner of my heart that didn't mind at all. This carefully constructed life of mine, this fortress of one, was being breached not by force, but by quiet, insistent gestures of care I hadn't asked for and didn't know how to refuse. December arrived, dusting the city with the first fleeting promises of snow. The club became busier, a haven of manufactured heat and expensive champagne against the encroaching cold. My routine remained the same. The booth, the whiskey, the watching. But something had shifted. The silence between me and Quan felt different now, charged with the knowledge of the black car and the prepaid taxi. He knew where I lived. He knew my small, quiet life was not as safe as I pretended. And I knew that he knew. It was a secret we shared, a fragile bridge built across a crowded room. His gaze would find me more often now, brief, anchoring glances. He never smiled, not even his almost smile. It was something else. A quiet assessment. A confirmation. You are still here. I am still here. It was the sparest, most profound conversation I'd ever had. My Sunday calls with Sarah became more difficult. Her world was one of brunch dates and work promotions and complaints about her landlord. It was the world I had left behind, and hearing her talk about it felt like listening to a broadcast from a distant country. "How are you, Mina?" "Really?" she'd ask, her voice full of a genuine concern that I no longer felt equipped to receive. "I'm fine," I'd say, and the lie would feel heavier each time. "I'm good. Work is good. Quiet." The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. My life was anything but quiet now. It was filled with the resonant, thrumming silence of a man whose name I still only knew from the embossed logo on the cocktail napkins. The illusion of safety, the one I had so carefully curated, was shattered on a Thursday. It was my day off from the archive. I had spent the afternoon in the blessed quiet of the rare books room at the public library, the smell of old paper and binding glue a familiar comfort. When I returned to my apartment, it was there, on my doormat, a single, perfect gardenia, its petals already starting to brown at the edges. A dead flower. My blood ran cold. It was Julian's signature. His way of saying, "I know you think you've escaped, but you are still mine to ruin." He had left one on my car windshield the week I left him. He had sent a box of them to my old job after I'd had him blocked. It was a message of decay, a promise of his particular brand of suffocating affection. He had found me. The city suddenly felt small again, all its noise and anonymity shrinking to this one terrifying point. My hands trembled as I picked it up, the petals cool and waxy against my skin. I went inside and dropped it directly into the trash, as if I could discard the meaning along with the object. But the faint, cloying scent of it lingered in the air. I told myself I could handle it. This was my mess, my past. I would not be a damsel. I would not be a problem to be solved by a silent man in a suit. I had survived Julian before, and I would survive him again. That night, I went to Sambre as usual. I needed the noise, the darkness. I needed the illusion of my corner of the world being impenetrable. I sat with my whiskey and tried to steady the tremor in my hands. But the room felt different. The shadows seemed deeper, the faces in the crowd more menacing. Every man who walked past my booth could be him. I felt exposed, the way a small creature does when the stone it was hiding under is suddenly kicked away. Quan was there, standing in his usual spot by the bar. He must have seen the change in me. I felt his eyes on me more than I saw them, a tangible pressure. He knew something was wrong. I kept my head down, pretending to read my book, the words a meaningless jumble on the page. I counted the minutes. 3 hours. 180 minutes. 10,800 seconds. I just had to get through it. But Julian was never one for subtlety. Not for long. Just after midnight, I saw him. He was standing near the entrance, his eyes scanning the room. He looked the same deceptively charming smile, the same casual confidence that had once drawn me in and later become a cage. When his eyes found me, his smile widened. It was a predator's smile. He started moving toward me, weaving through the crowd with an unearned familiarity, as if he belonged there. Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. I was trapped. There was nowhere to run. I watched him approach, a slow-motion nightmare. He was 20 feet away, then 10. My breath hitched in my throat. And then, A wall of black silk and muscle materialized in his path. Mr. Choi. He hadn't been there a second before. He simply was. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, an immovable object. Julian tried to step around him, his smile faltering. Mr. Choi shifted, effortlessly blocking him again. "I can't let you pass, sir," Mr. Choi said, his voice quiet but carrying an absolute finality. Julian's face darkened. "Do you know who I am?" he started, his voice rising with indignation. Mr. Choi's expression didn't change. "I do," he said, and that was all. He put a hand gently on Julian's chest. It wasn't a push. It was an anchor. Julian's forward momentum ceased entirely. Two other men, dressed in the same impeccable black suits, appeared at his elbows. They escorted him, his feet barely touching the ground, back toward the entrance and out into the night. The entire exchange had taken no more than 15 seconds. The crowd barely noticed. The music swelled. From his position by the bar, Kwon had not moved. He had watched the entire thing, his face a mask of stone. But his eyes were on me, and in them I saw something new. Not just acknowledgement, not just assessment, something that looked terrifyingly like possession. The dead flower had been a message from Julian. This silent, brutal ballet had been the reply. The club emptied out slowly after that, the energy of the night dissipating like smoke. I remained in my booth, unable to move, my whiskey forgotten. The tremor in my hands had returned. The quiet efficiency of Julian's removal was more terrifying than any brawl. It spoke of a world with different rules, a world of invisible power and absolute control. A world I had stumbled into. I told myself I should leave. I should run, not just from Julian but from this place, from the man who commanded it. I should go back to my small, anonymous life and bolt the door. I knew, even as I thought it, that it was too late. My little fortress had already been breached. Footsteps on the stairs to my alcove. Not the heavy, deliberate tread of Mr. Choi, but something lighter. I looked up. It was him. Kwon Jae-un was walking toward my table. In the 112 nights I had watched him, he had never once come to this side of the room. He stopped in front of my table, the small space suddenly charged, the air thinning. He didn't sit. He just stood there, looking down at me. The ambient light from the bar cast one side of his face in shadow, the other in a bruised gold. "You came," he said. His voice was quiet, a low baritone, exactly as I had imagined it. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. "I'm fine," I said automatically, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. It was the most obvious lie I had ever told. He didn't call me on it. He simply watched my face, his dark eyes missing nothing. The slight tremble of my jaw, the way my fingers were clenched around a book I wasn't reading. His gaze dropped to the book, then back to my eyes. "He knows your name," he said. "He knows where you work. He knows the number of the deadbolt on your door." Each fact was laid down deliberately, a stone sealing me in. My breath caught. The deadbolt. How could he possibly know that? The black car. The surveillance. I wasn't just being watched over. I was being known. Catalogued. Understood. "I will not be managed," I said, the words coming out with more force than I intended. My autonomy, the one thing I had fought so hard to reclaim, felt like it was slipping through my fingers. A flicker of something in his eyes. Surprise? Respect? Couldn't be sure. It was gone before I could name it. "This is not management," he said. "This is a fact. You are not safe. I am the reason he found you, aren't I?" The words were out before I could stop them. The thought had been a dark seed in my mind all night. Julian was resourceful, but was he this resourceful? Or had my new proximity to power made me a target? Made me a way to get to him? Kwon was silent for a long moment. Long enough for me to believe he wouldn't answer. The weight of what was unsaid pressed down. When he finally spoke, his voice was even quieter. "He was a problem before I knew your name. He became my problem when he learned mine." The implication was clear. Julian, in his arrogance, had made a mistake. He had trespassed. He had laid a claim on something that was, in Kwon's mind, already spoken for. The possessiveness I had seen in his eyes earlier was now in his words, unspoken but absolute. A cold wave of fear and something else, something treacherously warm, washed over me. I stood up, needing to be on his level to reclaim some small measure of control. "Thank you for tonight," I said, my voice clipped, "but I can handle my own affairs." His lips twitched, the ghost of that almost smile. "You can," he agreed, and the agreement was a surprise that disarmed me. "You are capable. You are self-reliant. You survived him before." He listed my qualities as if reading from a file. He had been studying me. It was unnerving. "And you are still in danger." "I have to go," I said, moving to step past him. His hand shot out, not grabbing me, but resting lightly on my arm. A point of contact. The fabric of my sleeve was suddenly insignificant. All I could feel was the warmth of his fingers, a searing brand on my skin. It was the first time we had ever touched. The touch lasted maybe 2 seconds, but my mind recorded every detail. The slight pressure, the heat, the shocking intimacy of the gesture in this public, yet empty space. He didn't use force to stop me. He didn't need to. The touch was enough. I stopped, my eyes fixed on his hand on my arm. He let it drop. "Stay," he said. It wasn't a command. It was a plea disguised as a statement. It was the first time I had heard anything but absolute certainty in his voice. "Just for a little while. So I can know you are safe." That small crack in his composure, that tiny admission of need, was more potent than any show of force. It was a direct question that I knew, instinctively, had cost him something to ask. This was the reckoning, the moment where the masks dropped, where I had to choose. I could walk out that door, back into my meticulously curated, and now completely shattered illusion of a life. Or I could stay. I could step into this world of shadows and silence and unspoken rules, a world governed by this still, quiet man who saw everything. I looked at his face, really looked at it, for the first time without the shield of distance. The exhaustion etched around his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the immense weight of the power he carried so silently. I have thought about that decision many times since. There is a moment, I know this now, when you stop falling and start choosing. I took a breath, and for the first time I used his name, the one I had learned from whispered conversations and the bottom of menus, a name that felt both foreign and intimately familiar on my tongue. "Okay, Jaeun," I said. "I'll stay." The almost smile appeared. This time it stayed for a full 3 seconds. Changed everything. He led me not out the front door, but through a discreet panel in the wall behind the bar that I had never noticed. It opened onto a private elevator, all dark steel and silent mechanics. We ascended without a word, the soft hum of the lift the only sound. The silence was different now. Not the charged, observant silence of the club, but something softer, more expectant. The doors opened directly into his apartment, a penthouse that occupied the top 2 floors of the building. The first thing I noticed was the glass. An entire wall was a window looking out over the city, a sprawling galaxy of indifferent light. The space was like him. Large, spare, meticulously ordered. Dark wood floors, low-slung furniture in shades of charcoal and gray, not a single personal item in sight. No photographs, no clutter, no books. It was a space that revealed nothing. Fortress. He didn't turn on any lights. The glow from the city below was enough, casting long shadows across the room. He moved to a bar in the corner and poured 2 glasses of water, the clink of ice against glass unnaturally loud in the quiet. He handed one to me. Our fingers brushed. A second jolt of electricity. I took a sip, the cold water a shock to my system. My hands were still trembling. "I won't be kept," I said, the words quiet but firm. I needed to say it. I needed to draw the line, even as I was willingly stepping over it. He turned from the window to face me, his expression serious in the half-light. "I know," he said. "That is not what this is." He gestured to the sprawling city below us. "That world," he said, his voice a low murmur, "has rules you don't know. Julian broke them. He entered my house to steal something that was not his." The finality in his tone was absolute. Julian was already a ghost. Past tense. What happens to him? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. He will no longer be your concern. That's all he said. It was enough. The threat that had haunted me for over a year, neutralized in a single declarative sentence. The relief was so profound it made me dizzy. I walked closer to the window, drawn by the endless expanse of lights. It was beautiful and enormous and completely impersonal. From up here, the streets where I had walked in fear were just glowing threads in a vast tapestry. It made my problems feel small. It made me feel small. He came to stand beside me, not too close, respecting the space I had drawn around myself. We stood in silence for what must have been 10 minutes, just watching the city breathe below us. The thing about silence is that it has texture. With Julian, silence had been a weapon, a punishment, a prelude to a storm. With Jaeun, it was a space to be shared, a sanctuary. He was building a new world for me, and its foundation was a quiet I had never known. Why me? I finally asked, the question that had been sitting in my chest for months. Why did you even notice me? He didn't answer right away. He seemed to be considering the question, or perhaps just the right words to answer it. In a room full of noise, you were quiet, he said at last. Everyone who comes to that place wants something. To be seen, to be forgotten, to make a deal, to find a partner. They are all broadcasting. You were just there. You wanted nothing. That kind of stillness is rare. It's loud in its own way. I had gone there to be invisible, and in my invisibility, I had become the most visible person in the room. A quiet anomaly in his loud, chaotic world. He turned his body slightly toward me. A direct question costs me something, you know. He was echoing my earlier thought. It was his way of telling me he was being vulnerable, that this confession was an offering. Now you ask one. My mind raced. There were 1,000 questions I could ask. About his business, his family, the source of his power, the nature of the danger he lived in. But none of those felt right. They were questions about the architecture of his life, not about the man inside it. I wanted to know something that wasn't a fact he could state, but a truth he had to feel. What are you afraid of? The question hung in the air between us, audacious and deeply personal. I expected him to deflect, to retreat behind his wall of stillness. Instead, I saw that flicker in his eyes again, the one I couldn't name. He looked away from me, back out at the city. He was quiet for so long I thought he would not answer. 27 seconds. I counted. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. A confession meant only for me and the glass and the night. That you would not choose this, he said. That you would walk away. And that I would let you. The honesty of it was a physical blow. It was the most vulnerable thing anyone had ever said to me. He, Kwon Jae-un, who commanded rooms with a glance, who moved men like chess pieces, was afraid of me leaving. And more than that, he was afraid that his respect for my choice, for my autonomy, would be the very thing that made him lose me. It reframed everything. The surveillance, the taxi, the silent removal of Julian. It wasn't about managing me. It was about creating a space safe enough for me to be able to choose at all. He was not trying to own me. He was trying to free me. I looked at him, at this man of immense, quiet power, admitting his deepest fear. And in that moment, my own fear, the constant, low-grade hum of it that had been my companion for so long, finally fell silent. It was replaced by something else, something warm and steady and sure. I reached out and placed my hand on his chest, right over his heart. I could feel its steady, rhythmic beat beneath my palm. Solid. Real. I choose this, I said. I choose you. His eyes closed for a fraction of a second. A silent exhalation of a breath he had been holding for 112 nights. He covered my hand with his skin warm against mine. His other hand came up to cup my jaw, his thumb gently stroking my cheek. It was a gesture of profound tenderness, a single perfect grace note in the quiet symphony of the room. He leaned in, and for the first time his lips met mine. It wasn't a kiss of passion, not yet. It was a kiss of recognition, promise, a seal on a choice made with eyes wide open. Outside, The first flakes of snow began to fall, silent and white against the glass. Each one a unique and perfect moment of stillness, blanketing the vast, indifferent city in a fragile peace. Mine if you choose it, he had said. And I had. It was enough. It was exactly, completely enough. The week that followed was an education in his world, taught not through words, but through atmosphere. I didn't move into the penthouse. I kept my small apartment, a tether to the woman I had been, a reminder that my life was still my own. But I spent my evenings there, high above the city, in the quiet company of the man who was methodically, silently, reordering my universe. He would leave before dawn for meetings I never asked about, and return late, carrying the weight of his day in the set of his shoulders. I would be there, sometimes reading by the low amber light of a single lamp, sometimes just watching the endless flow of headlights on the distant highways. My presence seemed to soothe him. He would enter, see me, and a deep, invisible tension would leave his body. We spoke very little. We didn't need to. We learned the rhythm of each other's silence. I learned that the slight crease between his brows meant he was wrestling with a problem, and that the only thing that smoothed it was the pressure of my fingers. He learned that I hated the smell of lilies, that I preferred tea to coffee, and that I sometimes hummed, unconsciously, when I was content. These were small, domestic intimacies, pebbles dropped into the deep, still water of our shared quiet, and the ripples spread out, changing everything. Mr. Choi would sometimes be there when I arrived, a silent sentinel in the hallway, his presence a constant, reassuring reminder of the invisible machinery that kept this world turning. He would nod to me, a gesture that had evolved from professional courtesy to something that felt like genuine respect. One evening, he was waiting for me by the elevator. "Julian," he said, his voice a low rumble. "He has returned to his hometown. He has decided to stay there. Indefinitely." The word hung in the air, full of unspoken meaning. It was the closing of a chapter, delivered without ceremony. Problem solved. A ghost exorcised. I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. "Thank you," I said. Mr. Choi looked at me, a flicker of something almost like warmth in his dark eyes. "Jaeun is different since you." He seemed surprised to have said the words aloud. He cleared his throat. "Good evening, Miss Lee." And then he was gone. It was the first time anyone in this world had used my name. It was another kind of anchor, another thread tying me to this place. My friend Sarah called on Sunday as usual. Her voice was bright, full of news about a new apartment she was looking at, a man from her office who had asked her out. For the first time, listening to her didn't feel like listening to a broadcast from another planet. It just felt like listening to my friend. "How are you, Mina?" "Really?" she asked. And for the first time, I didn't have to lie. "I'm good, Sarah," I said. And the words were true. "I'm really good." There was a pause on the line. "You sound different," she said, her voice full of cautious curiosity. "Happier." "I am," I said, looking out the penthouse window at the snow-covered city. It was a simple fact. I didn't offer any details. Couldn't. How could I explain this world of velvet shadows and silent power, of dangers neutralized and a peace so profound it felt like coming home? How could I explain Kwon Jaeun? Couldn't, so I didn't try. Some things I was learning did not need to be explained. They only needed to be chosen. One afternoon, I came back to my own apartment to pick up some more clothes. Tucked into my mailbox was a small, square box. My heart seized for a moment, a phantom limb of old fear. But the box was from a local nursery. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a small orchid, a variety I had never seen before, its petals a deep velvety purple, the color of a twilight sky. There was no card. There didn't need to be. It was a response to the dead gardenia, a statement of life, of beauty, of permanence. It was him saying, "I know you. I know the small, beautiful things you nurture. I will protect them. I will protect you." I carried it upstairs, my hand steady. I cleared a space for it on my windowsill, next to my other orchid. Two small, quiet sentinels in my fortress of one, which was no longer a fortress, but simply a home, a place to come back to, I told myself it was just a plant. I knew, even as I thought it, that it was a promise. A promise that new things could grow, even in the shadow of what had come before. That night, when Jaeun came home, I was waiting for him. I had bought groceries, an act of defiant domesticity in his stark, minimalist space. The scent of garlic and ginger hung in the air. He stopped in the doorway, his eyes taking in the scene. Me standing in his kitchen, wearing one of his soft gray shirts over my jeans. He looked at the bubbling pot on the stove, then at me. His face was unreadable, but I could feel the question in his silence. Is this okay? I'm making dinner, I said, my voice trying for a casualness I didn't feel. It was a test, a push against the boundaries of his world. He walked slowly toward me, undoing his tie, shrugging off his jacket. He didn't speak until he was standing right in front of me. He looked into my eyes, and I saw it again, that almost smile, but this time it reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. I know, he said. Smells like home. He leaned down and kissed me. A real kiss this time, deep and sure, tasting of the cold night air and the promise of a shared meal. It was an ordinary moment. A man coming home from work, a woman making dinner. But in this extraordinary world, it felt like a revolution. Felt like peace. Felt like the beginning of everything. We were two quiet people building a life in the heart of the noise, and our silence was the strongest thing of all. 3 months passed. Winter thawed into a wet, hopeful spring. The city shed its blanket of gray snow and blushed with the pale green of new leaves. My life settled into a new rhythm, a quiet orbit around 2 suns. The hushed, orderly world of the archive, and the deep, resonant silence of Jaeun's penthouse. I kept my apartment, but I slept there less and less. The penthouse had started to feel more like home. My orchid sat on the vast windowsill, thriving in the morning light. I had added a few books to a low shelf, small incursions of my personality into his curated space. He never